Okay, welcome. It'll be an intimate group today. This is our 13th Virtual Research Cafe. I'm Frank Gomez, Executive Director of STEMnet, and behind the scenes we have Monica Lacon, Admin Analyst for STEMnet. Much thanks to her for working the logistics and in publicizing today's event. The goal of the cafe is to help foster research collaborations across the system and catalyze the submission of joint proposals. We bring together CSU assistant professors to share their works in a relaxed setting for 10 minutes, reason for the 10.0. We hope you'll find some opportunities for collaboration and or learn about something new that you may apply to your own research and that may impact it. Feel free to contact any presenter in the chat box when they're not presenting. At the end of the 3 talks, we'll all come together for a Q&A in a relaxed setting. I'll also be monitoring the chat box to call questions from the audience. So let's begin. Once again, we have 3 wonderful speakers presenting a snapshot of their work. Our first speaker is Kristi Closser from the Department of Chem and Biochem at Fresno State. Kristi.
Thank you very much for the invitation to present here today. Are everything coming through okay? Slides shared well? All right. So I'm going to be talking today about some of the research in my group regarding using quantum chemistry to study the photodegradation mechanisms of persistent organic pollutants. And I'll talk a little bit about what those are. And generally, I am at Fresno State currently. And if you are interested in talking further after this event, please do not hesitate to contact me and we'll go from there. So I'm just going to launch right into it today. So we're interested in studying this class of compounds that are referred to as persistent organic pollutants. And generally, these are compounds that persist in the environment for long periods of time. They're a wide range of compounds that kind of satisfy this definition. They can come from sources such as industry, agriculture, or pharmaceutical industries, personal care products. And you'll notice there's some structural similarities. So they tend to have rings, and they tend to have halogen atoms attached to them. And in general, these will enter the environment through any of these sources, but then they can also be transported around. So, sorry, my slides are not in the order I expected them to be in. So here is kind of the picture of the environmental transport. So there's all sorts of processes by which they can end up leaching out of the initial application into the water supply. Those can then kind of end up in the groundwater or the rivers or various other places within the environment. And again, because these are very stable chemical structures, they tend to not break down easily. So one of the things that we're particularly interested in are pesticides, since we are in the Central Valley of California, and there's widespread pesticide use. So this is Fresno County and some of the other neighboring counties in the Central Valley. You can see the high concentrations of agricultural pesticide use primarily. So those are going to be sort of some of our target compounds, but the process I'm interested in generally is much more general. So generally, my research is focused on modeling photodegradation mechanisms. And so we're really interested in what happens to organic molecules after they absorb light. And so one of the things that can happen is that they absorb light, and then they, depending on which excited state surface you end up on, different processes can happen. They can break down in different ways and fragment or degrade. And it's important to be able to predict sort of what products you might end up with, because of the fact that sometimes the products are more toxic than the parent compounds, and generally that can be problematic. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with Windows. So this process is generally very highly complex, and in the environment, there's a lot of complicating factors. So it's not just the compounds themselves, but also the environmental effects. There's various various pathways that can happen, different situations. So we're really focused on using quantum chemistry to carefully and in a detailed way model the reactivity. And so this gives us a really detailed atomistic description of what we're looking at. And so again, I'm talking very generally today, but one of the projects we are specifically working on is looking at these phenylurea compounds and how they degrade. So the phenylurea compounds are compounds where we have sort of the phenyl group, which is here, and the urea group. So there's structural similarities here. These are typically widely used herbicides, and they're known to be very unreactive and environmentally persistent, and also highly used. So diuron, which is the first molecule shown here, is the third most widely used herbicide in California. And the other reasons for sort of choosing these compounds to start with were more theoretical, in that there's a lot of experimental data available on these compounds. And also there's a lot of sort of similar structures, as you can see here, which allows us to do sort of comparative reactivity studies. So between diuron and linuron, really the only difference is off this nitrogen group. And so again, we're kind of looking at this whole class of compounds and trying to understand reactivity differences and things specifically in those excited states. So our goals are really to be able to explain the observed photodegradation products of these phenylurea herbicides, and actually more generally just organic materials that persist in the environment. Other students in my group are working on pharmaceutical compounds and different classes of herbicides, and also kind of more in the method development side of things, kind of making things more efficient in terms of how we calculate these products. And so that's another part of the goal of this, is really to develop an efficient protocol that can be applied to a wide variety of compounds, even ones that aren't experimentally studied. So then we could make sort of suggestions on what you should look for in sort of field studies or experimental studies, and hopefully verify some of these. So one of the things that I'm interested in developing is some experimental collaborations that definitely can help us look at sort of testing the validity of our predictions. And so all the methods that my group uses are quantum mechanical based methods. And so we are generally looking at these things using a program called QChem. And then we do things like look at the ground state, look at the vertical excitations, which is sort of that initial light absorption, and then where they go from there. And so we've kind of looked at a wide variety of these so far, but really only the initial absorption, which we can see from the spectrum. We also look very closely at the electronic structure, and just for the sake of time, I'm going quickly. So we have pictures of the orbitals. We can look at sort of the details of the excited states and predict, basically based on the initial forces, which way the atoms are likely to shift and move. And so kind of conclusion so far is that we have determined by looking at these results that halogenated compounds are most likely to lose their halogens. In the process of the excitation, you populate what we call an anti-bonding level, which leads to that bond being likely to break. And then from there, from there, we can sort of look at the forces and make those predictions. We also have, this is again still in some of the early stages, so there's a lot more to be done sort of following after those initial excitations, but this is consistent with what's seen experimentally. And so with that, I will wrap up. So we have a lot of work still to do in terms of investigating these compounds. And I'm very interested in developing further collaborations, particularly with experimental or field study groups that are looking at various persistent compounds.
Thanks, Kristi. As a chemist, I certainly can relate to a lot of your work, and certainly in classes that I took many years ago. So thank you. Our next speaker is Raisa Hernandez Pacheco from Cal State Long Beach. Raisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I share my screen because still, let's see. Can the previous, yeah, thank you. Let's see. So you should be looking at my presentation right now. And let me get the shot to get my timing. Alrighty. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I'll be talking about Rhesus macaques as models of life history theory and population dynamics. So one of the things that my lab focuses on is on understanding life history theory, which is the theory that tells us about the rules governing the life cycle of populations. So what is the timing of growth? What's the pace of reproduction? What is the lifespan of a particular population? And this is central to evolutionary biology because it allows us to quantify selection gradients. By knowing the life cycle and the life cycle transition, we can understand which of those transitions contribute more to population fitness. And all these, we can do it within a reality of constraints or trade-offs, right? So we can't allocate the same amount of energy for a life cycle activity or to all of them, right? So there is a trade-off. Should I allocate more energy to these activities, such as, let's say, reproduction versus survival? And so today I'm going to be in a flash or in a snapshot talking to you about how we use this population of Rhesus macaques in Cayo Santiago to address this theory and be able to quantify either selection gradients or how this population optimize their life history within a world of ecological burden or pressure. And so Cayo Santiago is an island, very small island at the east coast of Puerto Rico that houses more than 1,000 Rhesus macaques. And each of them have an individual profile that includes individual ID, the date of birth, the date of death or removal, the mother, the sex, the social membership. And so we are able to track these individuals over time and understand how these ecological burdens that the population is under affect or drive these individual life histories and therefore target or address all these quantification of the life history evolution. And so one of many things that make this population special is that it is under the pressure of a extreme climatic but very rare events, and those are major hurricanes. And so this is in Puerto Rico. This is the example of the last major hurricane, 2017, Hurricane Maria. And so anything that touches Puerto Rico definitely touches the biological field station. And so we are able to have this unique opportunity of knowing individual level data in terms of life histories of a population that is subjected to this regime of major hurricanes. And so we have here Puerto Rico. This is the same hurricane again, and you can see the eye where it entered or touched the main island of Puerto Rico. And right there is the field station, Cayo Santiago. And so we're talking about an event that is so extreme that you have You one day wake up and you are in paradise, and then next day in about what, 8 or 9 hours, it looks like this. So you have a population highly dense, Rhesus macaques with no shadow, no place to hide. They can be pretty aggressive among each other. And so we're interested in understanding how these extreme events affect life histories and how this population, if it's coping, can optimize life histories after such an event. And so I'm going to very quickly, I'm going to address 2 questions at different levels. One is at the population level, whether hurricanes are major regulators of this population dynamics. And we have also addressed the effects of hurricanes as their potential role as early life adversity, how experiencing such a traumatic event early in life can predict your reproductive life history later in life. And so the first thing here I'm going to show you is 2 different distributions of population growth rate. And here population growth rate can be seen also as the long-term population fitness. And so the pink one would be a simulation for years of hurricanes, and the blue one would be a simulation for years of non-hurricanes. You can see they completely overlap, but there is a significant shift towards lower population fitness during hurricane years. And what we discover with this is that this population appears to deal with the optimization of their life histories during a hurricane year as I'm going to allocate all my energy to survive. They don't die during hurricanes, but reproduction is going to be suppressed. That will be a classical trade-off. And because population fitness is defined by both finite components, reproduction and survival, then we can see this significant shift to lower population fitness during hurricane years. And so again, this is a population that definitely grows a lot. And so relatively has a high population fitness, whether it's a hurricane year or not, but we were able to quantify hurricane effects and definitely can regulate a little bit of the population dynamics. When we asked ourselves whether hurricanes also have a role as an adversity early in life, well, we looked at the female population across the history of the island since the 70s to now, and divided the females into either a hurricane cohort or a non-hurricane cohort. The hurricane cohort would be the females that experienced a major hurricane early in life versus the control group, right? And so we looked at later life reproductive life histories. And so here you have age at reproductive debut across these 2 hurricanes. And what is obvious here is that there is a reproductive delay for those females experiencing these major hurricanes early in life. When we also looked at the entire a pattern of fertility, this would be mean fertility across age for both of these hurricane and non-hurricane cohort females, we can still see that delay of these females experiencing the hurricane very early in life during that reproductive debut. But what was very interesting here is that later in life, during prime reproductive ages in this population, those females that delayed reproductive debut had a higher mean fertility during prime reproductive ages. And so this data, what suggests is that this population has this alternative strategy to cope with early life adversity from hurricanes, let's say, in which those affected females will tend to delay reproductive debut in order to compensate for it later in life. And when we looked at lifetime reproductive success of these 2 groups, it's really not different at the end. This is still ongoing, and there's other things that are ongoing in the lab. And so to expand our studies on life history evolution, we want to now add a little bit of the context of the sociality within this population. So these are monkeys, they have a highly social structure. There are low-ranking individuals, medium-ranking, high-ranking, you have everything. Social groups also have ranks, so it's not only at the individual level. And so there is definitely sociality as a factor that may also be driving these individual life histories. And so we are very interested in now adding that component of sociality, so structuring individuals into social rank and trying to understand how social rank shapes or predicts their life history. And so besides doing or studying vital rates such as reproduction and survival, we also want to generate these health histories. So what we have been doing is to do this cognitive tasks on individuals. This is Alexis, one of the CSULB students here, doing cognitive tasks in Calle Santiago in individuals. And she did this on the summer. And we will go back next summer, target the same exact individuals with the same exact cognitive task so that we can build this individual health history over time. We know the sex, we know the age, and we know the social rank of these individuals. And so the idea here is to formulate a multi-state model, population model, to understand whether there are socially driven disparities in health in this population, which is from the life history, evolution, and ecologically perspective, super interesting, but also can be completely comparative for human studies. And so our lab is composed of wonderful students, and we have many partners besides the Caribbean Primate Research Center, which is the one that administers Calle Santiago. It is from the University of Puerto Rico. But all those partners are out of California. So right now, I don't study any local population. So anyone out there that is interested in similar questions within the life history perspective, I'll be more than happy to talk about and maybe increase or actually start building our networking here in a local aspect or a local geography. And so with that, I want to thank you for inviting me. Thanks, funding agency. Thanks to some of the co-authors I presented today. So Logan Levano is another CSULB student, and he was also a STEMnet scholar. Stephanie is another CSULB student, and Chris Sutherland is another collaborator. So thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Raisa. And it's nice to see Logan there.
Yes.
Having received a few dollars from STEMnet, so that's well appreciated. Our next speaker is Louise Edwards from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She's from the Department of Physics there. Louise.
Great, thank you. We'll just set up my screen share and turn on my timer. Okay, so in my regular day job, my expertise and interest is in galaxy evolution. So I'm an astronomer, an observational astronomer, and I'm getting prepared to use a brand new observatory that's coming online in Chile pretty soon, the Rubin Observatory, that's going to be conducting this sort of like amazing 10-year-long project called the Legacy Survey of Space and Time. So if there's any astronomers out there, think of me and please connect. I am interested in that. I'm also interested in increasing the pipeline to college for students from underrepresented groups by providing fun, relevant, and real-life data-driven products. So please connect with me if you're interested in that. But today I thought I would use the time to do something a little bit different, to talk about something that's a huge concern, not just for me, but all astronomers. And I think I can safely say something that came as a shock/surprise about 1.5 years ago to astronomers that has potentially devastating effects for my field as an observer, observational astronomer, and also for the lived experience of humans, every human being on this planet. So I'm going to talk about satellite mega constellations and introduce the subject and think about maybe some different mitigation techniques that we should be considering. So my email is up on the screen and is probably the best way to get a hold of me after if you're interested in anything I'm saying. So hidden worlds at dawn and dusk, mitigating the effects of satellite mega constellations. In the darkest skies, if you're going camping or something like this, maybe you're at the beach, you'll look up and you'll see about 4,000, if you have great eyesight, you'll see about 4,000 stars. That's about what's visible to the naked eye in, the hemisphere that you're looking at. If you're in the suburbs, you're only going to see about 250 stars. And if you're in a big city, LA or San Francisco or something, you might see a handful of stars if you're lucky. So clearly humans have already had a huge impact in our experience of the night sky, in the light pollution from the ground that we bring. A report by experts representing the global astronomical community concludes that in fact, we're on the precipice of another huge distortion of the sky caused by humans from these large constellations of bright satellites in low Earth orbit. These are going to fundamentally change ground-based optical astronomy and could affect the appearance of the night sky to you and to your loved ones. So a lot of what I'm talking about is coming from these two reports from this group of experts called SATCON-1 and SATCON-2. These are reports gathered by 250 scientists, engineers, satellite operators, and other stakeholders. And then also Nature Astronomy had in 2020 had a special issue on this topic. So a lot of my information comes from that source as well. So astronomers were taken by surprise, okay, when the first Starlink satellites shot across the sky. And when you first see it, it's kind of exciting, right? Like, look at all these satellites, that's kind of really neat. But if you think about what the ramification would be as you start to launch thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000 of these things into low Earth orbit, it's actually quite striking. So just from the first Starlink launch of about 60 satellites a couple of years ago in 2019, 19 streaks blasted across this astronomical image taken in Chile on the left. A simulation of 65,000 satellites, and where they would be is shown in the bottom here, on the bottom right of this image. All these little dots across the Earth are these satellites, not to scale, obviously. But it's not just SpaceX that's planning on launching these things. There's a large number of companies who are trying to do it. So the sort of image of the satellite constellation on the left with just a few satellites is completely naive. In the next decade, small satellites are expected to grow in number from about 2,000 in orbit right now to 100,000. And so on the right is an image, a simulated image, all sky plot of the trails left from about 50,000 low Earth orbit satellites, about half of as many that are currently planned for the next 10 years. So serious negative consequences for many research programs at the world's premier optical observatories are going to come from these things. At a minimum, a fraction of the area being imaged is lost to these trails or significantly reduced in the signal to noise ratio. Reasonable estimates based on the planned satellite constellations just in this decade imply that the night sky could be artificially brightened by as much as about 250%. And this isn't like light pollution today, where you can just go out into, the nature and still experience the Milky Way and see all of these stars with your eyes. This is not something that is going to be isolated to cities. This is everywhere on Earth. Think about communities that use the night sky for different uses. Okay, so an artificial brightness by about 250% is erasing the view of the Milky Way, our own, the band of light across the sky, our own Milky Way, and more than half of naked eye visible stars. So a significant difference to what you see in the night sky. Plus you would see, you'd sort of be looking up, and everywhere you look, you would see a satellite going by. And at first it's exciting, but if you think about long-term ramifications of this, not being able to look up and only see the heavens, but be polluted by humans' effect, I find it quite sad. So there are some ideas for what to do about this. Maybe launching fewer satellites would be great. This is basically the only option identified that can achieve zero astronomical impact, although everybody recognizes that's probably not going to happen. We could make sure we deploy the satellites at orbital altitudes less than about 600. That has been shown to have less bright satellites. You could darken satellites using sunshades or a shadow to reduce their reflectiveness, their impact to Earth gazers. Maybe you could control each satellite's orientation once it's up there, again, to make sure that it's not shining towards us. in astronomy, we're going to have to figure out ways to after the fact, remove the effect of these streaks that are going across our data, our images here. And then making some good work in tracking exactly where these satellites are, so that as astronomers, we would know where to avoid observing during a particular time, during a particular day. Okay, so some pros and cons about these satellites, of course. Look, let me not suggest that we should become Luddites completely, right? Small sat constellations can do a lot of good, and I want to make sure I say that. They could do good for science, you know, monitoring conditions, for communications, all that kind of stuff. And in fact, credit should be given to some of these companies, SpaceX in particular, for making early changes to their spacecraft. They didn't think of these things before sending up, but they certainly listened to the astronomical community when we complained. And they have changed their satellites and found that adding a visor on the satellite significantly reduces their visibility, which is great. All their new Starlink satellites are going up with these visors, so that's good. However, other big companies continue to develop constellation plans without working with astronomers or developing mitigation plans in mind. And there is no technical or legal barrier to building not small sat constellations, but bright sat constellations. So there's so much to do here. So what astronomers and others are advocating for is a radical shift in the policy framework of international bodies towards viewing space as an ancestral global commons that we have a responsibility to take care of. So the ask from this 10-minute presentation is, anyone interested in helping to characterize and remove effects on detectors? Are you into detector science? Experiment with coatings or technology that might reduce the effects of these. And you know, here at Cal Poly, we have such an awesome small sat group, right? Or is anybody interested in working on policy ideas in order to present to governments and or companies trying to do all of these things? And here's my last image here with these streaks on the left of this beautiful night sky, deep night sky project, which are, of course, the streaks from the small sats as they launch. And I'll just end with my references, which I'll leave on the screen here. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise, for a very, very interesting talk, and reminded me of the streaks in the sky of the, if you've seen the movie Greenland, with all the, it's about a meteor, a comet that comes, and it looks just like that, but that like destroyed almost all of Earth. So it's certainly a different thought there.
Different problem
compared to satellites. So so now we open it up to Q&A to our from our audience, and of course everybody and anybody here can ask questions or give comments. So we'll open up. I have a few questions, but I will go last. So anybody can ask whatever you want. So the floor is open.
I had a question for Kristi, actually. When I was watching your presentation, I was thinking about this topic that I don't know much about right now that I just presented. But I was thinking, like, you know, what are the pollutants, I wonder, that come from launching from such an increased number of launches? Like SpaceX is launching like every 2 weeks to get these satellites up, and it would be really cool to work with, you know, cameras to see what that would do.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of things out there. I don't really know a lot about what's produced in that process, but it would definitely be an interesting thing, and it would definitely fit in. But yeah.
So I was really intrigued by the by the Macaques, however you say it. My English is probably horrible.
We can compete with English. Mine is bad too.
But in terms of
Rhesus,
saying that, I don't say, the Macaques very well. But, lots of questions in terms of, what you meant by social group membership. And I think one question here, does adversity affect their social rank and or that of their offspring? That kind of came into my head.
That's a great question. And actually one of the students wanted to do it, but I don't think we have the means to do it. So it is tricky because, so in this species, the maternal rank is pretty much inherited. So if you come from a high-ranking mother and you are a daughter, you won't migrate from social groups. So you stay in the same troop most of your life. And so you maintain your rank. The males, instead, after puberty, they do migrate from social group, and the mechanism behind that probably is avoiding inbreeding, avoiding mating with your own mother or your sisters, right? And so when they will have their mother rank, but once they are out of the group and they have to, get into a new group, get accepted that through fighting, basically they earn their new rank, whether it's subordinate or high ranking, through fights. So I am not sure if it's an appropriate question for females, although I agree it's super interesting to see how environments early in life can affect because maybe if you have a group of high-ranking females with different environments early in life, you can track whether they maintain, what is the probability of maintaining that rank. I agree, it's very interesting. So, but I think from the male side, maybe I think it's even more interesting because you do have all individuals having a particular environment, whether it's high-ranking or low-ranking, so that would be your early life adversity, one of them, and then you lose it. And then what are the odds that you either will recover the same one or have a different one? So I think it's a super interesting question, the one that you're doing, and we have no idea.
So it's kind of like with the males, they have the option of, need for better words, in the human equivalent, marrying up. You marry well, or marrying poorly, where you can fall or go up, but from the females, you're constant, is what you're saying.
It is
right?
definitely, relatively more constant, and I would say for a lot of them completely constant during their life, because then of course you have these rare events in which one group may split into two, and then that will be some other opportunity for changing ranks too, right? But those are more rare. But yes, very constant for females, definitely not constant for males, and that's a very, very interesting question. Yeah,
it's very, very interesting. Very interesting. And I just have a follow-up. So after the hurricane, and maybe you don't have a lot of data points because I don't know how many hurricanes actually in a span of say 50 years actually go through Puerto Rico, but has the numbers of animals remained pretty constant on the island?
So yeah, they don't die. So when we do the models, there have been 3 major hurricanes since the 70s to now. When we do the models and we basically structure the population into ages and look at the age-specific fertility and survival, during a hurricane year, survival is not changed, doesn't change. So of course there's mortality. If you are one of the census takers that are experiencing the population every day, right? You go there, they will say that they might have seen more mortality, but statistically we have no evidence to say it's different. But what we see is that during those years, the vital rate that is affected or reduced is fertility. So that's why our potential hypothesis about these trade-offs, like they will put all their energy into surviving a bad year, and then because they are long-lived, they can reproduce later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I may have a question for Louise. Louise? So you ended up your talk talking about these legal and social aspects with space, right? And so I remember that one of the jokes for a lot of people was when this Space Force was created. And And I'm not a fan of the person, right? But I don't think that's a crazy idea. And so you just touched on it, because as we or many different countries are now very interested in all this, and all these companies are like, you know, freely doing whatever they want. And so how do you think the field is contributing to maybe changing or making people aware that this is something that is coming and not in the far future? So we need to deal with all this now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I'm not sure that, well, okay, I'm not a Space Force expert, but I'm not sure that the underlying goals of Space Force is to help protect. I'm not convinced that it's to help protect all of humanity's good and dark skies. So I don't know if Space Force is the right way to go, but I definitely agree that there are, all in astronomy has actually a pretty good history of being able to work with governments to secure policy that's followed to save areas that are required for research. So for example, in radio astronomy, early on in the 60s when it was developed, certain frequencies have been saved for radio astronomy. And that's super important because we wouldn't be able to do any radio astronomy without that, now that there's Wi-Fi, cell phones, all that kind of stuff. But because that was protected, any company or anything has to save those bands. But we do not have anything like that in observational astronomy. What's funny is way back in the 60s when people were doing this for radio astronomy, there was there was a couple of early warnings about what might happen, is essentially about to happen now, but they sort of, nothing ever happened with them. No policies were made and nothing ever came of that. But yeah, I mean, I would say like, it's really only in the last like hour and a half that astronomers were like slapped in the face with it. And we're probably the community to be sort of like, probably one of the communities to be heavily affected by it and notice and try to do something now. So there's been like, in the last year and a half, there's been meetings in the US and meetings in Europe about what can you do, but nothing has been done yet. Other than Elon Musk going like, actually, yeah, I like space. I want to save the Rubin Observatory. Let me see what my company can do. But, that's not much and it's not enough. So, I mean, yeah, I think trying to get I guess part of my goal is like, maybe I can do something, but also to get the word out to a bunch of scientists. So that's why I decided to talk about that today. And I think that most people like, just don't know. And most people in the world, if we're talking about everybody who would be affected, don't, how would people know that this is coming up? So I think there's a huge responsibility on people, astronomers now, to let people know what's going on so that we can try and do something. Now, again, of course, like we're not trying to say like no satellites evermore, whatever, but we're saying, if you put 100,000 satellites up, that even has like, risks in terms of environmental impact on the sites of launch. It's a huge impact in space junk, so now there can be a real risk of little bits of these things crashing together, and falling to Earth. Like, so, I mean, it's a real thing. And I think we need to do a better job getting the word out.
Yeah, thanks.
There was that recent, I think it was a few days ago, where the Russians did something with their, you know what I'm talking about. And I guess one of our satellites had to kind of maneuver out of the way because these things were coming, the bullets or the shock waves or this whatever debris was coming at, and when they're flying at 17,000, I think they're going at 17,000, it ends up being like 4 or 5 miles per second. And if you're blowing up things, those are just going to go right through your, through metal and what have you. So, I mean, even though space is vast, with, tens of thousands of things floating up there and tons of junk and little pieces of everything flying at, humongous speeds. I mean, I'm just amazed that there are not more, you know, tragic events and explosions and what have you.
Yeah, it's sort of one of the things that like the success could be its own downfall. Like if you want to take the dystopian view, you put all of these microsatellites up in low Earth orbit, right? You've completely polluted the space. And now if you want to send something into high orbit, you know, like put some, you can't even get out anymore, right? Because there's so much junk in there that it's hard to, you know, maneuver through safely. So it's, yeah.
So any more questions for our speakers today? Well, if not, I'd certainly like to thank everyone for being here. This will be our last virtual cafe until probably February, because everything kind of dies down for the holidays and some people are already on vacation until February or so. I hope you all enjoyed this. And if there's any potential collaboration or reach out, please do that. It's easy to get hold of the faculty here. And I want to remind you, as Monica just put it in the chat box there, that our next and final event for this calendar year is on December 3rd for our NSF Geo Directorate Programs and CSU awardees webcast. So with that all being said, I hope you have a great long weekend, and some of you may have an even longer weekend if you're not here next week, but a few of us do work on the early part of next week. So everyone have a great Thanksgiving, and we will see you, as my grandfather used to say, in the funny papers. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.